just by way of quick introduction, my name is Dan Montgomery, and I will be the moderator of this breakout discussion. Helping me is Kalina from the IAASB staff. I actually know several of you, or have met you along the way, either in the through other meetings or other forums. So it's good to see all of you. And my current role is as an advisor to the IAASB staff, senior advisor in technical projects. But I am a retired EY partner, 40 years with the EY. Also spent 6 years on as a member of the IAASB, including 3 years as the deputy chair. So very pleased to be with you this morning. So with that, Kalina, I think we can go ahead and get started with the discussion. We have 5 questions to help us here, and in the time that we have, would like to touch on all of these 5 questions if we can, and then also ask each of you to please feel free to comment as we go along. So maybe we can just go ahead and start with the first question, and this the first question actually ties into the polling question that we got the results from just before we headed into the breakout. So if you have any further thoughts, please, on the main cause of the expectation gap related to fraud and going concern. Josephine talked about 3 elements of the expectation gap, and certainly 2 of those elements, the knowledge gap and the performance gap, seem to come through loud and clear with the response to the poll. 32% of the group saying the user understanding was contributing to the expectation gap, and 24% that auditors didn't understand perhaps what their responsibilities were. So any of you have any further thoughts on that first question, the main cause of the expectation gap, or anything specific that you'd like to say about the components of that expectation gap? We can use the raise hands function. There's not that many of us in the group. If you click on the participants button at the bottom of your screen, you'll pop up the little screen with the raise hand function if you'd like to do that. Otherwise, just feel free to start talking. So would someone like to kick off, please?
Oh, I'm George Manuel from São Paulo, Brazil.
George, okay, welcome. So please go ahead.
If I can start. Expectation gap, I think, at least to my experience, I've been with PwC for more than 40 years. And in the last 5-6 years, I've been working at governance level, at boards and audit committees, that type of function. And in my view, expectation gap is something that the profession has been discussing for more than 100 years, whatever. Okay? It's a very, very, very long theme aspect that is on the table. And somehow, no matter all the evolutions, all the discussions, I think that we have not been able to explain to the public. So by that I mean there is a knowledge gap of the public of what is expected of an auditor. If I go to my grandmother or my father or whatever and ask them what do they think about an auditor, they think that an auditor will guarantee everything. And I think there is a large portion of the issue on us. It's our responsibility maybe to enhance communications, to make the things more clear in all forums, not only in the auditor report where we write and maybe few people read, but really as a matter of profession, we need to explain and be clear. In addition, and linked to that in today's dynamic. Obviously, the evolution gap, particularly with the new technology, with the global transactions, I think is also a relevant part of this matter. I would say that the combination of these two aspects makes all the difference, in my view. Stop here to let others comment.
Okay. Thank you very much, George. Anyone else, please?
So Dan, this is Doug Prowett. Good to see you. It's been a lot of years.
Yes, indeed. Good to see you, Doug. Thank you.
So just a quick comment on the two. So question one talks about the expectation gap related to two different things, fraud and going concern. And I see those as very different. I agree with what George said overall, but I think you have to separate the two. So in terms of fraud, I look at fraud and I see the expectation gap more in terms of an opportunity for auditors to do better. So more in terms weighted toward the evolution gap, where I think there probably is more that auditors can do. I think one thing that's kind of revealing is that a lot of the major financial frauds are not discovered by auditors, but are discovered in some cases by, for example, short sellers who have done analysis and said, okay, these types of results just aren't possible in these circumstances, and the auditors don't find it. So I think there's room there in the evolution gap area. In terms of going concern, I'll just kind of give an example here. Years ago, I was brought in by one of the major firms, which will go unnamed, and was invited to attend a discussion session, kind of a brainstorming session in London. And what I put on the table in terms of going concern was I said, look, we need to be forward thinking. And the thrust of the meeting was, let's be forward thinking and find ways to add value to others. And I agree with that generally. But when it comes to going concern, really the issue is we're looking into the future and rubbing a crystal ball and trying to make a call about the future. And there are inherent limitations in what advancements can be done in rubbing the crystal ball and looking into the future and making a call. And I made a comment that said, I think that auditors probably would be better suited not to keep hitting their heads up against the brick wall of the future and be very clear about what can and can't be done in terms of predicting that future, and be very clear about what their role is. That was the last time I was invited back, because the emphasis was, no, we got to be thinking about how auditors can do more. And I agree with that. But these two things, in general, I agree with that. But fraud, I think we ought to lean more toward the evolution gap. Going concern, I think we really need to be realistic about the limitations of peering into the future and making a call and taking on responsibility for being wrong about calls about the future. So I think that one is much more about a knowledge gap, and where the auditor needs to be very clear in communicating to the public what the limitations are, and doing what the auditor can do very, very carefully and to the fullest extent, but acknowledging that there are inherent limitations about going forward and not being willing to take on more responsibility than what can realistically actually be done. That just leads to increased costs to the auditor. Thanks, Doug. Really good insights. And perhaps, just based on these comments from George and Doug, certainly if others of you have a thought along the way with respect to the expectation gap for either fraud or going concern, please chime in. But this might be a good segue here, just to chat for a bit about the next two questions, because I think Doug has set this up quite nicely by separating or thinking about fraud and going concern separately. That the next question, maybe we can focus on fraud for just a bit. And by the way, I would ask the other participants if you agree or perhaps disagree with Doug's
position there. That they're two very different gaps, perhaps for us to think about. Please chime in. But with respect to fraud for just a moment, fraud in an audit of financial statements, what should the auditor's responsibilities be? We're all aware of the auditing standards and what auditors do now, but as we think about some of the frauds that the major frauds that have been publicized recently, any thoughts on what auditors either are not doing that they should be doing, or what else could be done with respect to fraud in an audit of the financial statements? Anyone want to kick that one off?
Dan, it's Sven here. I'm dialing in from Germany, and we indeed have one of these cases at the moment here at our place. And I'm also an EY partner. I think what has been laid out very nicely in the discussion paper is absolutely elementary and key, which is the ecosystem, to remind everybody who's playing what kind of a role with regard to financial reporting, and thereby also strengthening corporate governance and making clear who's having the responsibility for the financials and who's in the oversight responsibility / the audit committee on that. I agree with the comments made before that fraud and going concern is different and need to be approached differently. But there is maybe one element that is part of the knowledge gap, but at the end of the day could be flagged a bit more clearly, which I would call hindsight. So whenever these issues are popping up, public, politics, anybody else is in a position to use an hindsight element by saying, well, this is something one could have seen before, while the ecosystem and the surrounding environment is very much different as these issues go along. So I think this is something to further consider. With regard to short sellers and others, we also need to remind ourselves that the approach that we're taking is very much different to what a journalist or an analyst is doing. They can have an allegation, make it public, while we have to go through corroborative audit evidence, which is very, very different. And it's not easy also to transport. And again, it gets us back into the environment and the ecosystem and the responsibilities on that. Overall, I truly believe we need to get into a mind shift change. There's an expression mentioned at in the discussion paper that is talking about a suspicious mindset. So coming from professional skepticism into a suspicious mindset, I even would go further and say we need to have presumptive doubt in addressing the audits and going through the audit strategy. And this is something where we might want to have a further emphasis on for the future.
Yeah, thank you, Sven, and thanks for bringing up a couple of those points from the discussion paper. This notion of the hindsight gap, if you will, that is very easy for others to second guess what has been done or what has not been done, and also that the perhaps a broader notion of skepticism moving from where we are today to more of a suspicious mindset. Any others? I know, Michael or Keiko, if you want to comment on this at all, or Rob.
This is Michael. Why don't I go ahead and start? Can everybody hear me?
A little bit faint. But
right. Let's move in just a little bit closer to the screen. Okay, hopefully so you guys can hear me now. Now this is Michael from IAASB's C1 Auditing Subcommittee. Now, first of all, I agree with what I've heard so far. Clearly agreeing to going concern and fraud being two different approaches or two different topics requiring different approaches, no doubt about that. Now, with respect to the poll, I would like to say, just to add on, that I was a little bit unhappy that that you hadn't designed it as a multiple choice, because I do actually think that the two most named elements are obviously those, you know, that I observe as a supervisor as well. Now, with respect to the limitations that the auditor has, fully agree to that. You know, the profession, you know, has to watch costs at a certain level, meaning, you know, you can't, say, apply 10 times the resources for an audit as such. But at the same time, especially with the observed and probably in the future observable high-profile defaults, I think it needs to actually be you know, stated what the damage is if such high-profile defaults actually do come into play. What I mean to say in this respect is, you know, having just observed this very latest, say, fraud scandal in Germany relating to Wirecard, you know, a value was destroyed amounting to the entire overall turnover of one of the big four companies. You know, we're talking 30 to 40 billion euros, or at least US dollars, clearly, you know, value destroyed, meaning that if we do talk about such, you know, enormous the damage potential, then I do think, you know, the considering cost applied in financial statement audits, you know, can actually be reconsidered. At the same time, I do think that there clearly is a misperception in the public of what auditors are obliged to do, sort of, you know, by their professional standards. The question I'm asking myself is whether those requirements which are asked of you, meaning you, the auditors, is this what should be asked, or can the public not to a certain degree expect, maybe not a guarantee, but to have the type of mindset where challenging the management is, you know, one of the core demands that, you know, the public can actually expect you to fulfill, meaning it may not be the case now, but I mean, this is the IAASB's discussion or panel, and should the purpose of the audit not potentially be, well, reconsidered, or at least, you know, revised to a certain degree, giving you at the same time additional, say, powers to challenge the management. So I think it's clearly a combination of the two. It's definitely not understood in public, but the question is, does the public, those who do invest in a company, not have the rightful expectation for somebody to challenge management? Because when management is the one committing the fraud, then you automatically end up in a going concern issue, at least most of the time, and the damage is you know is enormous. So, you know, possibly reworking the responsibilities of an audit and the role of the auditor, I think, could be key to, at the same time, close that gap. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. And perhaps we could just, you know, probe a little bit further on the point of what auditors might be able to do, or what more they might be able to do with respect to fraud in an audit of financial statements. You know, the notion of challenging management, as Michael has just pointed out, the mindset that the auditors bring in, the professional skepticism mindset. And Doug, I don't mean to pick on you, but I know you have probably done a lot of thinking about professional skepticism. And I don't know if you have a thought in terms of this notion of a suspicious mindset, and, you know, if that was the direction, what that might mean in terms of what else the auditors would do, or what they would do different compared with what's done today.
Yeah, I certainly have done a lot of thinking. Doesn't mean I have Well, the answer is, of course, I know that, but I will say that, I kind of consistent with the comment that I made earlier. If there were to be, you obviously can't turn every audit into a forensic audit. The cost of that would just be terribly high, would take too long. Where I do wonder if there's room for a suspicious mindset type of approach would be at going into the organization and looking at it from a very high level. If you think about the really big frauds, many times those are not discovered by looking at individual items from a sample. Many times the really big frauds are discovered not even by the external auditor, but like I mentioned earlier as one example, by outside short sellers that look at patterns and just say, this just isn't realistic. I wonder if at a high level and a fairly efficient way, if somebody could come in on audit engagements with a very kind of a short seller mentality, learn some of the techniques that they use, and very, very suspicious to say, do things make sense? Do they fit together? It's very fundamental part of the basic auditing model. For way back to Pacioli, if you squeeze on one part of the balloon, that balloon has to bulge out somewhere else in ways that may not make sense. And so if we had a more careful, suspicious kind of approach to analytical procedures with a short seller mindset, I really think we would catch more of the really, really big frauds. And those are the ones that come back and damage the public trust. Those are the ones that threaten the existence of firms, the ones that are really, really big. And those are the ones that I think we could do better at finding if we applied a suspicious mindset from a very high level, using analytical procedures, using data analytics, new tools that are coming from data analytics, but from a big picture perspective to say, where do the financials not make sense? And when there's a really huge fraud, I really think in most cases it's possible to look at it and say, this just doesn't make sense here, or at least something seems amiss. Let's dig in further over here, using that big picture analytical procedure, short seller kind of mindset.
Yep.
Doug, this is George again, if I can, just to interact. Obviously, excellent comments, and I fully support them. But throughout the evolution of the audit, let's say, we ended up bringing specialists in the tax area, specialists in the valuation area, specialists in, pension areas, whatever it is. We are always bringing specialists to support and to assist the team. I have not seen in my career bringing people with mindset of a forensic audit, of a forensic skepticism. So I agree with you fully when we say we cannot turn an audit in a forensic audit. I fully agree with that. But I think there is an opportunity for us to bring these specialists to add their specific knowledge to the table and help the team and enhance the quality in all aspects that you mentioned. So that's, I would like to add to that. Okay.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, very, very good point, George. Thank you for that. Before we move off of fraud to going concern, anyone else want to make a point about the auditor's responsibilities with regard to fraud in the audit?
Dan, hi everyone. If I can jump in just to share some thoughts. First of all, I'm a TA at the IAASB and I'm head of audit at ACCA, just for those that don't know me. And I'm also the author of the reference report of ACCA within the IAASB's paper. So I'm actually looking at this problem of the expectation gap in a bit of depth. So I was really interested from the positions that I've heard. One thing that I would like to hear, maybe just to throw on the discussion, is it's great that a suspicious mindset concept is being discussed, but I would like to hear thoughts around how would that work in terms of the existing model that we've got between auditor and the audited entity as a client? How would that impact maybe the relationship? Wouldn't that have a risk of impairing the relationship? So it's one thing that I've heard in other discussions, and I wanted to hear if there are any thoughts there. And another thing that maybe going back to the initial discussion where we talked about the 3 gaps, I was wondering, how do you think that if we narrow some of the other gaps, how much do they help in thinking about the evolution? So what I mean by that, if we think about the knowledge gap, and if we narrow that and we bring the public in a better position in understanding what we currently have, as well as keep monitoring the performance gap as we are already doing, how would that impact the evolution gap? Wouldn't that be a little bit more realistic? Just some thoughts for the discussion. Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, thank you, Antonis. Some really good points that have been raised, and just in the interest of time, perhaps we could shift gears here and move to the auditor's responsibilities with regard to going concern. Now, Doug, I think, mentioned a little bit of that in his earlier remarks, just in terms of the going concern area being more looking into the future, and that that there are certainly limitations in terms of what auditors can look at too far out into the future with respect to either events or conditions or the viability, future viability of an entity. But anyone want to raise any points about the auditor's responsibilities, or what more could or should be done with regard to going concern, either with respect to management's assessment or the auditor's other procedures in that area?
So Dan, I'll jump in again. Oops, sorry, interrupted.
Go ahead.
I'll jump in really quickly, just kind of expand on what I was talking about a minute ago. I really believe, and there's been a lot of academic research in this area, trying to use highly sophisticated models to glean all of the data out from current and past information to project into the future to be more accurate at making a call one way or the other. And there are just some hard limitations. It's a cliff. It's a stone wall. And we can beat ourselves against that stone wall to try to get more, and maybe with some technology we'll get incrementally better at making that call, but there are really hard limitations into how much better we're going to get. So my view in terms of the auditor's responsibility ought to be to make sure that management is disclosing all the information that's available to help investors make a call whether the company is going to be able to succeed, to continue to go on business, and to do their role to ensure that, provide assurance that that information is complete and valid, just like we do with all other information, and then say, investors, you now have all the accurate, valid information that's available to us and to management for you to make the call of whether the company is going to be able to continue as a going concern. And the auditor's role should be to assure that investors have all the information complete, accurate, valid, so that they can fulfill their responsibilities as investors. I think that responsibility ultimately belongs on the investors, and the auditor's role is to ensure that they have all the information that's available, complete, valid, accurate.
Okay, thanks, Doug. And coming at it from that angle, Michael or Rob, just based on your particular roles, perhaps you have a thought in terms of the disclosures and the nature and extent of the information that's provided to to users in this particular area.
Well, this is Michael again. Now, say from a supervisory point of view, I think the disclosures are typically not what I would consider to be the problem. At the same time, I clearly agree with Douglas that the future can simply neither by management and even less by auditors as such, be predicted. So expectations in this regard are probably limited to, let's say, current figures or evaluations, found on balance sheets, meaning that if such numbers are correct, then the rest is to a certain degree left to the investor. Because everybody will themselves have a different, say, future prediction for a business they invest in, and whether they're right or wrong, the future will have to show. But at that point, I think it's the investor's responsibility. Up to there, I think it is obviously the responsibility of management, checked through the work undertaken by auditors, and therefore that is all that can be expected. But if the numbers do add up on current balance sheets, I think this will to a certain degree solve the going concern issue, at least to the extent possible. Once again, there's no glass ball. I used to be a banking supervisor in the financial crisis, 2008. And I can assure you, we would receive predictions like, 1 in 1,000 years, and then 3 months later, it turned out to happen. So you cannot model the future if that were possible. And as many times as it's been tried, especially in the financial services industry, it's always failed. So I think going forward 12 months is about as far as you should take it. Anything beyond that time frame will just blur additionally, and the best base to even predict to that time span is simply to work with the right reliable numbers, and that's where I think the auditor's responsibility is. Thank you.
Okay.
It's Sven here, real quick. I think they say there's a second expectation gap around that, because if we have a situation that a company really goes belly up within the 12 months period after we sign the auditor's report, everybody is going to say, why didn't you see? How could this happen? And if we're looking at the disclosures at the moment, if we go for international accounting standards, if we go for other GAAP, we prepare financials, or company management prepares financial statements under a going concern assumption, not really explaining why they believe a going concern assumption is met. And also we don't have a direct statement, neither by the management board nor by the supervisory board. And that's my corporate governance issue I alluded to on fraud. And I think it's similar true for going concern. We need to have more accountability on going concern also for management and the supervisory board by making public a statement, an active statement, why they and that they believe the financials are prepared under a going concern assumption. And then for the auditor, I agree, we're going through the respective assumptions that have been defined. But again, in this ecosystem, we need to get the roads straight out and we get them right.
Yeah, thanks for that, Sven. And that actually, we've been talking in and around the fifth question in terms of what else can be done by others within the ecosystem. And you've talked about management, those charged with governance, whether it's an audit committee, a supervisory board, full board of directors, whatever it might be. If I interpreted your statement correctly, Sven, it was perhaps in addition to their oversight role, governance and management's role in terms of preparing the financial statements, perhaps a more direct statement about the going concern assumption to establish.
Agree, Dan. Exactly.
Yeah.
Because at the moment it is just in note 1 we say the financials are prepared under a going concern assumption. That's it, full stop. And then you get a whole lot of risk factors in the management commentary, but no real direct application or explanation why management and also the supervisory board in a 2-tier system, or otherwise the non-execs, would consent to that assumption, and what's the basis for that assumption from a management perspective.
Yeah. We've got a few minutes left here. I presume that when this timer runs out in about 7 minutes, that we're all going to be brought back into the main meeting room. But one question that we haven't really addressed yet is question number 4, and that's a question about transparency about the auditor's work, specifically with respect to fraud. We're going to be talking in the next breakout session more about transparency for going concern. So maybe focus here on fraud. Transparency, it essentially gets down to what's visible to users of financial statements in terms of what the auditor's role and responsibilities are with respect to fraud. Certainly, the Auditors Report is the key way of doing that. And today, there really is not much in the Auditor's Report with respect to fraud. So does anyone have any thoughts on question 4 in terms of, first of all, is more needed? Is more transparency needed? And if the answer is yes, how might that be accomplished? I think in your previous remarks about fraud, I think it was clear that perhaps more education is needed, a better understanding of investors and other users about what auditors do with respect to fraud. But how does that message get communicated to them? I guess that's the key aspect of question number 4.
I go back to my previous comment that perhaps disclosing more by or through the utilization of specialized people, we can give a better information to the public and enhance their understanding of what is the auditor doing. So I think I kind of connect what my previous comment. There is a room for us to do more. There is a room for us to bring a specialist. And if the market has that expectation, it's our responsibility to fulfill, even if we have to expand the hours that we use, expand the approach that we apply. That's my view.
Okay, thank you, George, for that. And maybe just to focus in on the auditor's report itself for a moment. What are your views in terms of whether it might help to say more in the auditor's report? I mean, basically, the only thing that I recall is in there today is in the auditor's responsibilities section. Obviously, there's the description of the audit providing reasonable assurance about the auditors obtaining evidence in that regard, identifying and assessing risks of material misstatement, both with respect to error and with respect to fraud. And actually, in the new auditor's report, there's a little bit more about misstatements due to fraud being more difficult to detect because of the inherent limitations and possibility of collusion and whatnot. And is there more that could be done? Perhaps if specialists were used, including forensic specialists, to specifically state that, or does that create even more of an expectation gap or a hindsight gap should problems occur later? of fraud be uncovered. Any particular thoughts in that area?
Dan, I think that last point that you made about being sensitive to adding information that enhances, if we increase expectations with no real increase in ability to meet those expectations, we're not doing anyone any favors. And it's interesting to me, going way back to the time when you and I were on the Auditing Standards Board years ago, some of the discussions that we had and hesitance to add information to the auditor's report that would help people understand what the limitations of the auditors are. There were always some who were saying, no, we've got to be able to do more, and so let's not ratchet back expectations. And I get that. We need to try to look for ways to provide more value, but at the same time, I think we have to be very, very careful about adding anything that increases user expectations without a commensurate ability to actually perform against those enhanced expectations. So I'm really happy to see actually some additional information about the difficulty of detecting fraud. I do think there are opportunities here, like I said, to enhance our ability to find fraud, whether it's use of more specialists like George and others have said. But to add anything that would to have higher expectations without being able to meet them, I think would not be a good idea. I think we'd be very sensitive to that.
Okay, a good point, Doug. And I gather that the bell ringing is alerting us to the fact that we've got less than a minute here. And anyone have any last views on question 5 in terms of what others in the financial reporting ecosystem might do to help narrow the expectation gap? We've already talked a little about it. Anything, I know on the going concern side, the accounting standard setters come up quite a bit in terms of their role in setting accounting standards and responsibilities for management in that regard.
I'd like to echo the comments made before that we shouldn't raise the bar. And as of today already, everybody's expecting we're detecting fraud, and there's this huge expectation gap. I think where we could develop a little bit further on the reporting is indeed to say, shouldn't there be a compliance risk management system? And shouldn't we give some comments on that? Shouldn't we give a reflection with some either weaknesses, deficiencies, findings, etc.? Because that would give the user, the investor, real more information, and also would refer back to those charged with governance.
Very good, and a good final statement.